Hello and welcome to a Glastonbury Romance. Can you believe I almost forgot to do it today? Whoops. And in case you're curious, I went back and checked and we did not skip over anything last time. So that's wonderful news. Not a sentence did I skip. I just have keen memory. Knew exactly where to begin. So let's begin today. Matt Decker stopped what he was doing at once and began putting the sacred vessels away. True enough, Sammy, he said with a sigh. The truth is, I was thinking of something else. He closed the cupboard, turned out the gas jet, and they both emerged into the body of the church. It now became necessary to communicate to the worshippers at St. Joseph's vacant coffin that they were about to lock up the church. They moved to the door, and the father held it open while the son crossed the aisle. Since their appearance on the scene, the two intruders had contented themselves with a whispered conversation. They had not dared to strike any more matches. "Pardon me, gentlemen," said Sam. "My father wants to lock up the church." The man upon his knees struggled stiffly to his feet, emitting a little groan as his bones creaked. They neither of them spoke a word, but began following their dismisser meekly and humbly to the church door. With a mute bow, Matt Decker indicated to them his gratitude for their obedience and moved aside to let them pass out. It was such a dark night that although he thought he had seen both of the men before, he could not recall their names. When the key was turned and the empty sarcophagus of the Arimathean was once more left alone with the presence under the red lamp, the father and son followed the strangers down the flagged path, past the miraculous thorn bush, to the gate into the street. Here there was a suspended gas globe, and here the strangers turned, revealing the black bowler hat and hooked Roman nose of Mr. Owen Evans, and a broad-shouldered, rather fleshy individual, without any hat, whose grizzled head under their suspended light seemed to Sam the largest human head he had ever seen. It was the head of a hydrocephalic dwarf, but in other respects its owner was not dwarfish. In other respects, its owner was the normally plump, rather unpleasantly plump figure of any well-to-do man, whose back had never been bent nor his muscles hardened by the diurnal heroism of manual labor. "How do you do, Mr. Decker? How do you do, Mr. Sam Decker?" The Welshman threw into those words all the Ciceronian ceremoniousness of which John Crow called his first manner. "I know you two gentlemen, though you don't know me," Owen Evans went on, "but of course you know my relative, Mr. Geard." "Ah, here's Mr. Geard. He's the one who got the will, don't you forget." Both father and son looked at my relative, Mr. Geard, with unashamed curiosity. It gave them both indeed a queer sensation to shake hands with this ambiguous person under the gas lamp in the silent street. For although Mr. Geard's visit to Glastonbury had been few since he had left his family and gone to Northwold, all the air had been recently vibrant with a gossip about him. The money that his employer had left him had been doubled and trebled by such gossip. Wherever, since his return, his bare hydrocephalic head had appeared, the envious feeling and the wondering awe had arisen. There goes a very rich man, Mr. Geard had become, in fact, a local celebrity, a fairy story hero. And the rumors about his purchase of Chalice House, one of the famous slow places of the town, had kept alive a romantic interest which, if the man had left the vicinity, would have soon died down. "Of course we've heard of Mr. Geard," said the elder Decker politely, "and we met only today at Mrs. Drew's, a very interesting young man who told us that he was a friend of yours, Mr. Evans." "I must not keep you, gentlemen, for I know it's late," went on the Roman-faced Welshman. "But I would like to hear which side you've taken in the dispute Mr. Geard and I have been having under the aegis of St. Joseph." "I'd like to hear about it very much, Mr. Evans," said Matt Decker. "Won't you walk a step with us? For I am a little afraid that our housekeeper will be getting anxious about us." "Well, perhaps," murmured the Welshman, hesitating and glancing at his companion. "Perhaps my relative, Mr. Geard, is feeling tired." But they all four set themselves in motion in the direction of the vicarage, and it was not long before they reached the medieval front of the Pilgrim's Inn. Although the rest of the street was quiet, there were lights and the sound of raised voices inside the mullioned window of this old building. "I was trying," said Mr. Evans, to convince my relative that the fact that so many visitors come to the spot from all over the world is no proof that it is miraculous. But it is a proof that something important can at any moment occur. Occur where? Inquired Mr. Decker. In the mind! Cried the Welshman, raising his hand to his head and giving his bowler hat such a violent jerk downward that its brim rested on the bridge of his great nose. Very gravely, as they all four stood still upon this illuminated pavement outside the ancient inn, Matt Decker extended his hand to this bowler-hatted oracle. Good night, Mr. Evans, he said. We won't take you further, but it interests me profoundly that you should make that remark, because it's what I've been feeling for several years. I associated myself, as I told them just now at White Lake, with the conquest of the air. But as you... Mr. Evans did not let him finish this sentence. He had already taken the priest's hand and was shaking vigorously, but he dropped it now as if it had hurt him. The air? He murmured gloomily. Did you say the air? And pushing back the brim of his hat, as if it had been a visor, he snuffed with the angry nostrils at the element referred to. No, Mr. Decker, no. What I was referring to was the mind. When the mind is clean, the change we are looking for will come. It's to clean the mind, Mr. Decker, to purge it, to wash it, to give it a new birth, that all those people... He removed his hat altogether now and waved it, without finishing a sentence, towards the illuminated windows. You do see a little of what I mean, he added then, addressing the enormous cranium of Mr. Geard. But the beneficiary of William Crow's fortune was engaged just then in the private quest of his own. He had advanced cautiously towards one of the lighted windows and was peering in. His air was so exactly the air of an inquisitive servant, gazing with aloofness and yet respectful curiosity at a remote revel of his master's, that Sam was betrayed into a jest. Are they behaving decently or indecently in there, Mr. Geard? The canon's friend swung around upon his heel and surveyed the young man. The lad was astonished at the look of affectionate reproach in his large face. Had Sam been an impertinent young seduce, addressing an insolent remark at some great rabbi whose holy innocence confounded him, he could hardly have felt more ashamed of himself and more of a flippant fool than he did at that moment. Mr. Geard, however, made no audible reply to those rude words. It was the descendant of the House of Rise who answered for both of them as they all nodded a final good night. My relative, Mr. Geard, he said, intends to bring a great many people to Glastonbury. More than have come since the time of the Druids. And we must pray that all who come will be allowed to wash their minds clean. These singular words, spoken in Mr. Evans' second manner, kept repeating themselves inside the hollow skulls of all his three listeners as they walked silently home to their different pillows. When Mr. Evans took out his latchkey and left himself into his little antique shop, he was disturbed by a particular sadistic image that he had not been troubled by since he saw John Crow embrace the Healy Stone at Stonehenge. This image was concerned with a killing blow delivered by an iron bar. Mechanically, he closed the street door. Mechanically, he lit a candle. Mechanically, he met the marble gaze of an alabaster bust of Dante. Mechanically, he extended the flight of narrow stairs to his bedroom above. Once in his chamber, it was with the same automatic movement that he laid the flickering candle down on a rosewood chest of drawers, and clicking open the stiff latch of the casement, gazed out into the empty street. He saw nothing of the massive chimneys across the way. He saw nothing of the carved Gothic doorways. He caught no floating essence of diffused sweetness from the beds of jonquils and the little gardeners below these houses. The mystical breath of sleep rising from the summit of the Tor, and from the pinnacles of St. John's Church, and from the broken cornicles of the ruined abbey, arched past him by untouched. One single image of homicidal violence, at once a torment of remorse and a living temptation, wiped out completely all these impressions. Had the soul of that planet of love, which had done so much that night for Nell Zoylan, been made aware of this figure of a lean, hook-nosed man at a window, with a bowler hat upon an unmade bed behind him, what would its attitude to such a one have been? He has taken my own violence of ravishment, natural and passionate and sweet, that planet might have thought. and has turned it into a crime against nature and against life. Never can he be forgiven. But long after that Star of the West went down behind Brent Knoll, Mr. Evans's tormented murmur floated out over the Glastonbury roofs. If only I could see it once, just once, with my own eyes. What Merlin hid. What Joseph found. The cauldron of Yer Ichwood. The undying grail. This madness would pass from me. But... He craned his neck out the window, pressing the palms of his hands upon the sill. His pose was grotesque. It was as if he were about to address a crowd assembled on the opposite roof. But, Mr. Evans screamed at his twanging, quivering, twitching nerves, and although no sound but a lamentable sigh passed his own lips, it would have been hard for anyone watching him not to believe he was shouting, But... I don't want to see it. Ooh. Wonder what's going on with Owen Evans. Well, that's the end of that chapter. That was chapter whatever, White Lake Cottage. We'll begin next time with the next chapter, which is The Look of a Saint. Until that time, I hope you're eating your Wheaties and vegetables and keeping safe. Leave any comments you have about Glastonbury. I'm always glad to read them. Even this guy's, I get these spam positive comments. I like reading those. Just let me know if you have any thoughts. I think it's getting pretty intriguing now. We're only 151 pages in, so there's more to go, and who knows what will happen. Till next time, cheers.